Therefore, to start with something familiar and to get everybody on board, and at the starting point, allow me to summarize very shortly the status quo before BEPS. As you all know, currently creating a permanent establishment, a PE, can be triggered mainly by a fixed place of business or an agent, an independent agent. So we would use these most popular, if I may use these cases as starting point if we look at any changes that might occur by the BEPS plan. If we start with the fixed place of business PE, then you need to create a PE in the first instance, a fixed place of business that has to have a certain duration. In addition, the kind of activities are decisive. That means the core business of the company has to be provided by the fixed place of business. All the criteria are met, then the company creates a PE by a fixed place of business in the foreign country. Second option is to look at the agent PE, meaning that you have an dependent agent acting on behalf of the company, having the power to conclude contracts on behalf of the company, and you doing usually exercise this authority to conclude contracts. So these are the main options, cases that you have found in the past. As you all know and are aware of, all of these points can be discussed already by now and under the new BEPS rules too. Enough of stretching and warm up by now, and let's start running with the BEPS changes. I'm right.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're discussing the actual changes in detail. I would like to discuss a little bit of the purpose of the BEPS action point number 7. This will help you in understanding the actual changes. BEPS action point number 7 is part of the wider BEPS action plan of the OECD. And the BEPS project of the OECD is generally meant to combat structures in which taxation does not align with the economic reality. Taxing rights should be for the countries in which the economic activity takes place, and double taxation should be prevented. Non-taxation should be prevented to the extent possible, according to the OECD. And this purpose of the BEPS action plan very much aligns with the specific purposes of BEPS action point number 7. In our there are two main purposes of this action plan. The first one is to prevent the artificial avoidance of the PE status, where cross-border income would otherwise be untaxed or taxed at a very low rate. And the second one is to combat tax structures of which the legal reality is different from the factual or the economic reality. And to reach this outcome, to reach those objectives, there are three main changes proposed to the PE definition. The first one is to extend the agency PE definition, and this one only deals with the so-called commission-head structures, as we will see later. It is to prevent avoidance through the specific activity exemptions. The last one is to prevent abuse by introducing some kind of anti-fragmentation rules. Changes, various consequences should be taken into account if we are looking at, let's say, the main impact. The first and general observation is that we see that the OECD is really changing some of the international tax principles, where historic taxing rights are very much allocated to the country in which labor takes place, in which capital is being attributed. One can see that taxing rights are more and more changing to countries in which the products are actually being delivered, where the services are being delivered. And that's a real change in the international tax environment, and it does not only relate to action point 7, you can also see it in other action points from the BEPS plan, like for example the transfer pricing related items. Is that we can of course expect a significant increase of permanent establishments. Will lead to let's say a higher compliance burden for the international operating companies. It's not a bad thing to have a PE. It very much depends on, let's say, the tax resource country compared to the home country. But one thing is sure, that there will be more discussions and the compliance costs will increase. Last important option is that we can expect a significant increase of discussions with respect to the profit allocation, especially because due to those changes, we can see that more and more routine functions are considered to be a permanent establishment. But the question always is whether there's any profit to be allocated to these kind of supportive or routine functions. And this is likely to lead to a lot of additional discussions with local tax authorities. This, let's say, this general background, we now move to the actual changes, and the one related to the agency PE. I think perhaps this is already this can be considered to be the most important and maybe also the most difficult change. And one thing is sure, this change will have a great impact to all kind of international sales structures. And this change is clearly a measure that, in the view of the OECD, should attack structures of which the economic reality is not in line with the factual reality. As before in the introduction, currently there is a clear definition of an agency PE. One of the main requirements is that the agent should have the authority to conclude contracts in the name of the principal. In practice, this leads to many discussions between international companies and tax authorities, especially in cases where formal signing of a contract takes at head office level, but the part of the negotiations take place at local level. And then whether the requirement that the agent has the authority to conclude contracts is actually met. And this mismatch provides for possibilities to avoid countries where sales takes place. And according to the OECD, this is not the ideal situation, and it's not in line with the general purposes of the BEPS project. The intention is that these discussions will no longer exist in the post-BEPS world, because after the implementation of these changes, it's an agent plays the role leading to the conclusion of contracts. So full signing is no longer necessary. This leads to more agency PEs, and this formal signing takes place will no longer be relevant. Our sales agents nearly always plays an important or principal role in the conclusion of contracts. It can be nearly all dependent sales agents will now be covered by the PE definition. So this change can be very huge. It's important to review your actual sales policy and to see what your dependent sales agents are doing abroad. Another change relates to the fact that in the future, also agents, or in fact commissioners, that contracts in their own name may qualify as a PE. This change is meant to cover so-called commissioner structures. A commissioner is a person or an entity that sells products in its own, but for the in the account of the principal company, the foreign company. So the market is served by the commissioner, but it does not at any moment take title, formal or legal title to the goods. The commissioner is selling products on its own name, and it does not formally bind the principal company. Based on this legislation, it does not qualify as a PE. So there is no taxation of the principal company in source country. But this changes after the implementation of this change. In these features, the principal will be deemed to have a PE in the source country in the future. So this leads to many situations in which a company has both a subsidiary, being the commissioner, and a PE in the source country. And the relevant change in the concept of agency PEs relate to the exception to independent agents. And imagine that especially due to the first two changes, this exception becomes even more relevant in the future. Based on current legislation, an independent PE is by definition not an independent agent is by definition not a PE. This will not change. So a real independent sales manager will still not be affected by the changes. The definition of an independent agent will change. And the message will be that independent persons that operate more or less exclusively for the enterprise will be deemed to be an independent agent as well. So it's very important to review the current relationships you will have with your, let's say, independent salespersons to see whether they will be a dependent sales agent in the future. It's very, if you look at those changes, to realize that after you are deemed to have a PE, always the question becomes relevant. And the next question is, what is the level of profit to be allocated to the PE? And in relation to commissioner structures, where the company already receives a remuneration for its services, it's questionable whether there is room for additional profit allocation. So this will lead to a lot of discussions with local tax authorities. And a question with respect to this change is that so-called limited risk distributors seems not affected. A limited distributor is an entity that does formally take title to the goods. It's very comparable to a commissioner, but the only difference is that a limited risk distributor has, at a certain point in the supply chain, legal title to the goods. It can be strange that those kind of structures are not affected by the changes because, in fact, from an economic point of view, there are no much differences between a limited risk distributor and a commissioner. Nevertheless, it's explicitly mentioned that these kind of structures will not lead to a PE. So it could be worthwhile to reconsider the supply chain and to see whether this could be a solution to, let's say, mitigate the impact. Now, Ines again to discuss the other proposed changes.
Thank you very much. Allow me a short side note before I start with the next BEPS change. It will be interesting to see which countries apply which rules. For instance, with respect to Germany, the German government announced already that they don't like the commissioner rules so much. And the interesting thing about that is not because they don't like the rule at all, but because they suppose that more PEs will be created outside Germany, and this would lead to a reduction of the tax base in Germany. As Marianne said, the main issue that we are probably facing in the future is the discussions between the countries. Country A is joining it, and if country B is joining it, do they see it in the same way? So not only discussions with the own tax authorities, but probably discussions with foreign tax authorities will lead to more compliance work and more administrative burden. So this is something that has to be taken into account as well, besides of the pure nature of the changes. Next point on our list is the specific activity exemptions. Another well-known area from the existing double tax treaty. As you all are aware of, currently most of the double tax treaties exceptions according to which a PE is deemed not to exist, where a place's business is used solely for specific activities. And these activities are normally activities that cannot be linked to specific or huge profits. So we named them on the slide. That's usually the storage of goods, the display of goods, or the delivery of goods. So a classic example would be the consignment stock. Goods are taken by the customer, the processing of goods, collecting information, purchasing. And an important issue, as you will see in the further proceeding, preparatory or auxiliary activities. And still at the moment, a combination of these activities. In a post-BEPS world, a kind of preparatory or auxiliary activity test has to be done. This is that we can use this famous phrase in the tax world, it depends. It depends on the concrete circumstances of the case and of the business model the company uses. Also, the business area in which the company is active. Because depending on the company's business, depending on what's usual in this kind of business, we could have several solutions. So in some cases, still the same solution as in the world before that. We have mere preparatory activities that do not lead to a permanent establishment, but there are, of course, certain cases in which after BEPS there is the possibility that we come to the conclusion there is a PE, because even if at first step the activity seems to be preparatory or seems to belong to the named activities, it's part of the core business of the company. The example that you can find on the slide is or are the e-commerce companies, because even if for companies that are producing goods, storage of goods, display of goods might be preparatory or auxiliary activities, for those e-commerce companies, this is part of the core business because it's typical for their business model and their business chain. And of course, the OECD does not or did not choose this in a move. This is aiming at the new economy and the new business models where the OECD thought were not yet covered by the double tax treaties in an efficient way. Especially all these kinds of industries have to double check their current structure and have to see whether there are consequences, because if yes, then these consequences will be huge. So this lead the companies that are affected by this change to some alternative considerations. And it's right to the next point on the BEPS list, so-called anti-fragmentation rule. So the OECD thought about the next step as well. What could or actually happened already, and what could be alternative models companies are thinking about. This relates also to the point that Narayan mentioned in the beginning. They want to combat tax structures of which the legal reality is different from the factual reality. So this can refer to a single enterprise as well to groups to closely related enterprises. May start with the example single enterprise. The company could think about doing several providing several activities in the country that, if you look at the single activity, are only preparatory. However, if you look at all activities that are done in the respective state, might lead to the consequence that the sum of the activities has to be seen as part of the core business. And to prevent that companies avoid the creation of PEs, splitting up the activities in several preparatory activities, you have to do now this, as I said, preparatory or auxiliary activity test. This is also, or this applies also with respect to closely related companies. So if you look at the chosen example, it's also an example that the OECD usually takes. You have one company that is producing and selling the goods, and another company who is the sales agent. And company R that is producing and selling the goods has a storage facility in country S or in state or wherever in the foreign country, where the group company is actually selling the goods. So if you just look at each company itself, then the storage of goods does not lead to the creation of a permanent establishment. If you look at the combination of activities, then this is differently. And this is the approach that the BEPS action plan is choosing. They are looking at the group and the sum of activities. This aspect, is it correct in this way? And I think, from my view, this is a very critical point because from my point of view, there is no need to see it in that way. That's, from my point of view, just a tax argument. Avoid that there is no PE in your country. Therefore, I would suppose that this is one of the changes that leads to most of the discussions between the countries, and something that has to be clearly checked in advance, looking at the structure that the group is using, finding out if there are any points that could lead to this anti-fragmentation rule, because I think that's not reasonable. The solution has to be to avoid an application of the anti-fragmentation.
The final change we would like to discuss before moving to the implementation of the changes and some actual case studies. The final change relates to the so-called project PEs. As you may know, normally, in case there is a construction or an installation product that exceeds a certain period, which period in most tax-free 12 months, you are deemed to have a PE in the source country, even if you do not have a fixed place of business or an agent. And this BEPS measure tries to detect abusive structures based on which a PE is being avoided by means splitting up the relevant contracts in view of the minimum period. Speaking, there are various ways of contract splitting. but are specifically being covered by this measure. The first is a situation in which a company has two projects in a source country. They have two separate contracts, and both separate contracts do not exceed the 12-month term. Currently, it can be argued that there is no project PE in the source country. However, if this anti-splitting rule will be implemented, those projects have to be counted together. So if the project is 6 months and the other project takes 7 months, then the total 13 months and you are deemed to have a PE. Another splitting up contracts also to the closely related companies Ines mentioned before. And basically this change is meant to cover group companies that are doing project abroad, where both projects takes again less than 12 months. But if one of the group companies would do projects, then in total this group company would be active in the source country for more than 12 months. And under the rules, those have to be taken together to assess whether the minimum period test is being met. So again, these rules are trying to attack, let's say, abusive structures. The difference between the previous changes is that those changes will not be implemented by means of a change in the PE definition. Those changes will be covered by the general purpose test that will be implemented in many of the double tax treaties. So it means that if there are ways of, let's say, contract splitting, these will normally be covered by this general anti-abuse rule. Words on the implementation, because it's important to realize that this is not only theory, but it will be actual practice very soon. It's not being included in the bilateral double tax treaties. Therefore, changes in principle only apply to the extent a bilateral tax treaty contains the new rules. And we see some relatively new double tax treaties that have got this new PE concept to a certain extent. However, very important to realize that to implement those changes, it's not required to negotiate the existing treaties, to renegotiate the existing treaties. This is one of the other action points of the BEPS projects of the OECD that develop a multilateral instrument to implement the BEPS-related treaty matters without concluding new treaties. And this multilateral instrument has been developed. Actually, it has been signed by many countries on June 7 in Paris. The multilateral instrument is very complex and also very innovative instrument in the international tax world. You can spend a or even a conference on this multilateral instrument itself. For this, it's important to realize that countries have got a choice to implement all or some of the changes in the PE definition. Only between two treaty partners for a change, then the actual change will be implemented. And it will be implemented without an actual change of the double tax treaty. Of course, imagine that this is very complex and also very risky because you can no longer rely on the actual treaty text itself to determine what the, let's say, the international tax consequences of your structure are. You always have to look at the LI, the choices of various countries, and the reservations made by the various countries. It's important to realize that due to MLI, the change regarding the PE definition can be implemented very soon. When parliaments approve the choice made by the respective countries, they actually apply. So this time to review and to reassess your international structure to see whether there could be any adverse impact. Some actual case studies to see how these changes will, let's say, impact your foreign, could impact your foreign structure.
To get the link between the multilateral instruments and the case studies, allow me to provide an example. For instance, Germany has at the moment 96 double tax treaties. We decided by now to sign 35 multilateral instruments, multilateral instruments with 35 countries. On the other hand, 33 countries decided to do it with Germany. So, as Marianne said, you have to monitor closely what happens to see whether you have only a double tax treaty or a double tax treaty and a signed multilateral instrument. And check that has to be done. The next point on our list are some case studies that allow us to show issues around the creation of PEs currently, but of course also in connection with the BEPS world, the BEPS action point number 7. To start with a case that our colleagues in the UK had to clarify for a Romanian company. Colleagues were approached by the Romanian company that provides maintenance and cleaning services for various companies. The company had contracted with a UK company that enters into contracts with third-party clients to provide these UK-based maintenance services. And subsequently, the UK company subcontracts the services to the Romanian company. The company was interested in the fact whether they have any risks in creating a permanent establishment in the UK. Indeed, the Romanian company supplied to provide the services in the UK. The workers planned to come to the UK and to be provided with temporary accommodation in Caravan. The individual workers spent less than famous 183 days a year in the UK, and the Romanian company had a side office at the factory. And lastly, the contract was to be signed for a period of 20 months. As we have mentioned in the course of this webinar, there are always two main issues that you look at first sight, the place of business test and the agent test. In this case, actually, the place of business test is relevant than the agent test. And the main question about this case was, is there a permanent establishment by a fixed place of business? And if you look at the facts of the case, then place of business must be permanent. However, the premises that you use do not have to be your own premises. They can be rented, they can be shared. Even if you have a defined place in an office and you have the full power of disposal, then this can lead to the creation of a permanent establishment. And in this case, additional effect that in the OECD model tax convention, an example was provided taking painters as examples that spend for 2 years, 3 days a week building of its client to paint that office building. In the end, the UK colleagues came to the conclusion that it's more likely that a permanent establishment in the UK is created because the respective workers spend a defined time in the UK, could use a defined side office at the UK factory, and in some the services provided belong to the core business of the company. What does this mean in the post-BEPS world? And this is a perfect example for the rules that have been explained before, the anti-fragmentation rule and the anti-splitting rule. Because especially the anti-splitting rule is something the company could think about by doing the work one after the other, or on the other hand, by using a company, a sister company, another group company, and splitting up the services to avoid a permanent establishment. Anti-fragmentation rule that could lead to the same result is something that this company has to think about in the future, because as explained, also the OECD was thinking about the alternatives that this, in our example, Romanian company could think about. And if you look at this case, the anti-splitting and the anti-fragmentation rule could lead to the effect that it's hardly avoidable to have a permanent establishment in the UK. This example can be done in 100. We have chosen one, as you can see on the next slide.
The key to share with you here is that don't think just because you're not involved in artificially avoiding permanent establishments that rules won't apply. They're very widely drawn and they catch many structures where business is just being undertaken and you believe treaty benefits will be available, you believe that a PE won't be created, but there is a bear pit that catches you. So the point through this variation to think about is when you're looking at the immediate trading company that is setting up a business or having some business overseas, you need to look at the big picture. Don't just evaluate the relationship between main company and what's done in this case in the Netherlands. You've got to look at the big picture, what's going on within the group, so that you don't fall foul of, most importantly, the anti-fragmentation rules and the anti-splitting rules that, as Man has already shared, are widely drafted and will catch many, many companies out that aren't expecting them to apply purely because they came as a out of the erosion and profit shifting initiative from the OECD. And to sort of positive spin on PEs for a moment, when setting up a PE or when a PE created overseas, there obviously is a compliance burden, but also opportunities in relation to optimizing the effective tax rate of the group. You are moving over to a jurisdiction with a lower corporation tax rate and without a high branch remittance taxation. This clarifies a few of the key points within that variation we talked through, the permanent establishment, preparatory and auxiliary character that we've already touched upon. The most important point there was, does the top company have any other taxable presence in the Netherlands that could mean the Dutch business is impacted by these new rules? Key to look at the big picture that I wanted to share with you there.
Yeah, the case study is a Dutch case from my actual practice, and it really demonstrates how the BEPS changes are already impacting or should impact the strategic decisions a company has to make. We are dealing with a Dutch company that has sales offices across Europe, and those companies are currently classified as limited risk distributors, which means that sales officers are supporting the Dutch company with the foreign sales, and they do take formal title to the goods within the supply chain. This is the entrepreneur from a PP perspective. It means that the Dutch company has the main functions, the main risks, and the main assets. And an entire stock for whole Europe is held by the Dutch company with the Netherlands. However, the group is currently considering to set up local distribution centers in the various European countries as well. And they are considering two strategic options. The first one is to have the distribution centers held by the European companies, and is to have the distribution centers held by the Dutch company. And the question, how to structure this and whether the BEPS action plan has any impact. Clear impact of the proposed changes that we discussed before. Because in action, you see that it's possible to set up the distribution centers and held by the Dutch company without creating a foreign PE. And this is the fact that the distribution centers are only used for storage and delivery of goods. And then the other is that it can be argued that the specific activity exemption would apply since it's a limited activity only. And then you can argue that there is no PE in the foreign country. In the post world, this will be completely different because the BEPS situation, it's questionable whether we can still apply this specific activity exemption. This is the fact that for retail companies, storage, delivery of goods can be considered a rather or maybe very important element in their business. And this is if this exemption can no longer be applied, distribution centers are held by the Dutch company, it's more likely that a foreign PE will be deemed to arise. And then a significant difference because in that new situation, the profits to be allocated to distribution centers are the source countries, while in this situation, the profits to be allocated to the distribution centers are taxed at the level of the Dutch company. And taking into account this difference, it can be considered to have the distribution centers held by the sales companies directly, because that would prevent you having a foreign PE, and the outcome would be the same, namely taxation in the country of source. This is a clear example when we see that the strategic business decisions that currently have to be made are all affected by BEPS changes that are being proposed. Final case study for today.
Okay, thank you very much again for handing over. We have chosen this case study kindly provided by our colleagues in Denmark because it's a very usual way to start the business if you're looking at new markets. That means you engage a sales manager, and this sales manager is usually working by traveling around and has a home office. The job that was to be done was the following. The German company was engaged in software and hardware solutions and had hired a Danish resident sales manager to carry out sales activities and customer services in Scandinavia. The sales manager's job was and is to report to the company, to look for new customers in Denmark and Scandinavia. We'll have no permanent office, no shop, no similar premise available to him in Denmark. And the employment contract that was concluded required the sales manager to work from at home, However, most of the time, he was traveling around, and only if there was some administrative work to be done, he did this in his home office. And in Denmark, it's quite usual to ask for binding ruling, and this is what the Danish colleagues did in this case. They asked for a binding ruling when job and these facts would create a permanent establishment in Denmark. And the quite interesting solution already before that was that Danish tax authorities said, yes, there is a permanent establishment in Denmark. I'd ask me now, explain in the beginning that a permanent establishment requires inter alia a fixed place of business, and usually a home office. The employer has no power of disposal, does not lead to a permanent establishment if respective sales manager has no power to conclude contract. And that was the case. Now, or beside this aspect, Danish tax authorities consider this in a different way. They said it's not relevant if the premises, it was irrelevant if the premises were available to a company, that the company could not demand access to the sales manager's home. They focused on the work for the company, and that this work was done with a certain kind of duration at this place. And last point on the list that they looked at was the question, what kind of work is he doing there? And they came to the conclusion, this is part of the core business. Therefore, they ticked the box premises, they ticked the box duration, and finally ticked the box core business, came to the conclusion that's a permanent establishment in Denmark. So already before that, this led to establishment in Denmark, and as you can see on the slide, the Danish colleagues said they do not expect the BEPS action point number 7 to make any law changes in Denmark, because the existing domestic tax law already addresses these proposals. The point that we want to address with this case study is, on the one hand, it might be worth looking already at current structures that you have. It might be possible that there are no changes, and you have already the risk. On the other hand, it might be possible that different countries come to different solutions. Because if you look at this case, then I could imagine that several on your side are telling me, well, in my country, a home office usually do not create a permanent establishment. And so it is in Germany. And had the discussion in this case to convince Germany that there is a PE in Denmark, and that therefore part of the tax base has to be taxed in Denmark, not the final result that part of the profit is taxed in Denmark and all of the profit is taxed in Germany as well. So in case, because very usual, companies start their business in this way, no changes in certain countries because the BEPS rules already exist, and look at is the question permanent establishment or not?
Hey, we've had one question here that I think is very timely, given we're about to summarise the key actions and things that can be done. It's very difficult for our company to identify permanent establishment risks globally. An individual could be sent to Brazil for a month, or some could be sent to the Far East for a month. Any advice regarding collating information and identifying permanent establishment risks? So perhaps I leave that with you both to cover during this slide.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay. Last but not least, a kind of wrap up. So, what have we done? What are the next steps that are recommendable? From a point of view, the first step is always to look at current structure, to do a kind of health check and analysis how the situation is at the moment and whether there are any risks already due to the current regulations. If you think about the Denmark Germany home office. The next point on the list would be, is there a need for action due to BEPS action point number 7? And this refers to risk minimization as well as to seizing opportunities, because even if we mentioned the risks of the BEPS changes, as Maron said in the beginning, it's not only negative, because especially our colleagues from the Eastern Europe countries provided us with the information that many are interested in creating a permanent establishment in their country because the tax rates are quite low, and certain kinds of businesses, especially consignment stocks and things, that are at the moment on the non-PE list, are quite interesting for them. So for those companies, you have to look at the opportunities and possibilities as well. Nevertheless, and this allows me to at least partly answer to the question, because that's a really good question and a critical point. How to collect the necessary information, and ideally how to collect this information in advance if you do not know whether a construction site will take 5, 10 or 20 months. So one of the challenges of the BEPS action point number 7 will be how to structure the collection of information and to guide the company with respect to PE, because something or one of the clients that we have also mentioned, well, I have 200 projects a year. How can I monitor these projects? I have to find a guideline for the company, because I can't decide and do it case by case. So the question is perfect. Unfortunately, by now, there is not yet a perfect answer to that, because this is exactly the critical point about it. And what we are thinking about at the moment, and what we would like to develop, is kind of PE tracker that allows a company to structure its projects in a way that they can determine in a standardized and safe way whether they will have a PE issue or whether they won't have. And if they have a PE issue, how to avoid or how to handle it. But please allow us to still work on this matter, but as soon as we have the first outcome, we will of course share it with everybody. So I hope this is a satisfying answer, at least for the moment. Last, you always think about the target structure first. So ideally, the question is not tax or no, but ideally the question should be, what would be my favorite structure? And the second question, how to find the best tax solution. And if your favorite target structure can't combine with the best tax structure, then we have to think again how to combine both targets. After you have this health check, the next points would be what actions are to be taken, what steps are necessary to achieve the target structure, and as we said in the beginning, parallel watch the further developments with respect to M&Is. BT also post any development in this matter on the BTR website. So you're invited to have a look at the website to find the respective information and to use it for your purposes. So the intention of our webinar was to create the necessary awareness about the changes, about the fact that you have to review your current structure and define the next step.
We've reached the hour mark and haven't got any more time for questions, but we'll follow up with anyone else that has raised any points. If you have any questions after today or permanent establishment concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to Ines Marijn or myself. We look forward to your feedback, specifically regarding future webinar topics that are of interest. Thanks for joining us. Many thanks to Ines and Marijn for sharing those insights with us. Thanks a lot and have a great day. Goodbye.
Goodbye.